Welcome back to the Fiscal Architect. I'm Bran William. To the untrained eye, American foreign policy looks like unmitigated chaos. The mainstream media calls the current escalating conflict in the Middle East a strategic miscalculation, a chaotic blunder, or a legacy mistake. They are wrong. They are looking strictly at the shadows on the wall, completely blind to the financial architecture beneath. The truth is far more cold, calculated, and entirely transactional. We have entered the era of World War Trump. Before the gears of the state lock into place, subscribe to the Fiscal Architect and turn on notifications. In a world of engineered chaos, access to unfiltered structural data is the only way to safeguard your sovereignty. Whether you praise his actions or condemn them, you must understand his strategic frame rate. Donald Trump does not operate on ideology or long-standing alliances. He operates on leverage. He understands that the unipolar world order has fractured. And in this leaderless G0 vacuum, the nation that controls physical scarcity controls the globe. The current escalation in the Middle East is not an accident of history. It is a structural necessity. The United States has initiated a campaign to violently enforce global participation in its financial system. The superpower that built the post-war order is no longer protecting it. It is actively weaponizing scarcity to save its own economic floor. The era of easy assumptions is over. The Donro Doctrine has begun. Your portfolio, your currency, and your family's future are now tied to a high-stakes geopolitical gambit. The survival of the American empire via the absolute weaponization of global energy. For nearly a century, traditional U.S. foreign policy positioned Washington as the generous protector of the globalized system, patrolling the oceans for free trade and guaranteeing the safety of allies who frequently underpaid for their security. Trump's core thesis is that the world has bullied and taken advantage of American generosity. His response is a radical departure from the post-Cold War consensus. It is what has been identified as the Donro Doctrine. The premise is absolute. The entire Western Hemisphere fundamentally belongs to the United States. From Canada and Greenland down to Mexico and the massive oil reserves of Venezuela, Trump is constructing Fortress America. Under the rules of the Donro Doctrine, no foreign power, specifically Russia or China, is permitted to operate or trade within this hemisphere without explicit American authorization and the payment of a direct toll. To enforce this strict perimeter, the United States has parked 1/3 of its entire naval footprint directly in the Caribbean. The message to Beijing and Moscow is clear: pay a tribute to the United States, or your commercial vessels will be targeted and seized. By locking down the Western Hemisphere's resources, Trump is executing step 1 of the global reset, making the rest of the world entirely dependent on the United States to fulfill their basic energy needs. But why this sudden violent pivot to Iran? Why risk a global war of attrition? To understand the motive, you must look directly at the crumbling foundation of the American empire, the petrodollar. The US dollar possesses no intrinsic physical utility. It is a digital abstraction. For 40 years, its dominance was sustained by a brilliant arrangement, forcing the world to trade energy exclusively in greenbacks. Because every nation required oil, every nation was forced to hoard US dollars and buy US debt. effectively financing America's massive national deficits and military expansion. It is a financial Ponzi scheme. And like any Ponzi scheme, it requires continuous forced global participation to prevent an immediate collapse. That participation is evaporating. A non-dollar Eurasian trading bloc, forged by the resource sovereignty of Russia, the industrial manufacturing of China, and the strategic geography of Iran, is actively building an alternative economic loop. They are trading directly among themselves, building a Eurasian railway system to bypass maritime blockades, and preparing to back their commerce with tangible assets like gold. If the global community realizes they can buy oil without holding US debt, the forced demand for the dollar vanishes. The trillions of paper shadows held in foreign central banks will flood back home, triggering an inflationary collapse of the domestic economy. The invasion of Iran is not about spreading democracy. It is a hyper-aggressive defense mechanism to smash the Eurasian trading bloc, seize control of strategic maritime choke points, and preserve the forced dominance of the dollar at gunpoint. Inside the United States, the national defense strategy has silently shifted from global peace preservation to a doctrine of managed global chaos. Under Trump's transactional framework, if the US retreats to its fortified Western Hemisphere, it can safely allow regional conflicts to burn across the rest of the world. When Europe fights Russia and East Asia fractures over the Strait of Malacca, the United States achieves a dual strategic victory. It eliminates its economic competitors, while positioning its own industrial base as the ultimate supplier of reality. Look at the industrial architecture right now. The Pentagon has actively approached major commercial automotive manufacturers, instructing giants like Ford and General Motors to halt consumer vehicle production and immediately pivot to munitions. Why do these corporations comply so willingly? Because the profit incentives are staggering. Unlike selling vehicles to an unpredictable retail consumer market, manufacturing for the military-industrial complex means these companies face zero competition, can essentially charge whatever price they dictate, and receive guaranteed debt-financed government payouts. Industry insiders report that profit margins on a single 155mm artillery shell can exceed 500%, a return on capital that no consumer vehicle could ever generate. The American economy is cannibalizing its consumer shadows to maximize the production of matter, steel, explosives, drones, and heavy armor. War is no longer a political liability. It is a highly lucrative business model designed to sustain corporate margins through endless global attrition. But the transactional elite have made a fatal miscalculation. They assume the 21st century material era can be conquered using 20th century shock and awe air power. Trump historically relied on decapitation strikes, assuming that assassinating top leadership would force an immediate systemic surrender. But Iran is not a flat, easily accessible desert. It is a massive mountain fortress. More importantly, its military command has undergone a radical structural evolution, the Mosiaak strategy.
Time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran. Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats from the Iranian regime, a vicious group of very hard terrible people. Its menacing activities directly endanger the United States, our troops, our bases overseas, and our allies throughout the world.
Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has completely decentralized its forces into 31 distinct provincial armies. Each province operates with its own localized command, its own supplies, and total operational autonomy. It is the military equivalent of an unquarryable physical fortress. No single column holds up the roof. The system was engineered specifically to function even when 90% of its leadership is completely severed. There is no central brain to strike. There is no leadership hub to assassinate. If the US takes out a general in Tehran, 30 other independent armies continue fighting seamlessly on the ground. The Mosiaak strategy is an uncoordinated, relentless mechanism designed specifically to drag the United States into an unwinnable war of attrition. And a war fought across jagged mountain peaks cannot be won with drones and tech company software. It requires a massive, continuous footprint of physical human boots on the ground. This brings us to the ultimate physical cost of this conflict. The voluntary era of national defense has silently been replaced. In our next briefing, we look past the financial charts and dive straight into the December deadline, the return of the US national draft. We will expose the quiet legal architecture passed under the National Defense Authorization Act that transitions the Selective Service from a voluntary system to an automatic lottery database. We will show you why the Pentagon has already calculated that survival in the material era requires the automated indexing of every eligible male aged 18 to 26. The blueprint exists. The question is whether you are building on it or waiting for someone to hand it to you. To ensure you receive our next strategic intelligence briefing before the gears of the state lock into place, subscribe to the Fiscal Architect. We are no longer trading shadows. We are building the future on matter. Stay resilient. Stay sovereign.